The morning everything broke apart began in silence, the kind that presses against your chest before you even know why. Daniel woke before the alarm, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment while the city outside was still dark and indifferent. For a few seconds, he allowed himself to pretend this was just another workday. Coffee, emails, deadlines, a predictable rhythm that kept his life from collapsing. Then he heard a soft cough from the other room, and reality returned. He slipped out of bed and walked to his son's room, where 6-year-old Liam lay tangled in a blanket, his hair sticking up in every direction. Daniel smiled despite the heaviness inside him. Since his wife had died 3 years earlier, these quiet mornings had become sacred. He helped Liam get dressed, tied his shoes, and listened patiently as the boy talked about a science project and how he wanted to be an astronaut. Daniel nodded, encouraging him, hiding the fear that constantly whispered in his mind. I have to hold everything together. At the kitchen table, Daniel poured the last of the milk into Liam's bowl and drank his own coffee black to make it last. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no warnings. Just another day, he told himself. Another day to survive at the office. Something felt wrong the moment Daniel stepped inside. Conversation stopped when he passed. His access card hesitated before unlocking the gate, a small delay that sent an icy ripple down his spine. He reached his desk and noticed his computer already logged out, a security lock flashing on the screen. Before he could question it, an email notification popped up on his phone asking him to report to the executive boardroom immediately. No explanation. His heart began to race. As he walked down the long corridor, memories flooded his mind. Late nights fixing systems no one else understood, weekends sacrificed, promises made that loyalty would be rewarded. He entered the room and saw his manager seated beside a woman from HR, both wearing the same strained, apologetic expression. They didn't ask him to sit. The words came quickly, practiced, stripped of emotion. Restructuring, financial efficiency, necessary cuts. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. When they finally said he was being let go, effective immediately, the room seemed to tilt. He reminded them of his performance reviews, the projects he had saved, the profits he had helped generate. He mentioned, quietly, that he was a single father. The HR representative nodded as if she'd expected that, then slid a thin envelope across the table. Severance details. Health insurance expiration dates. No mercy. No discussion. Security walked him back to his desk as though he were a criminal. Colleagues avoided eye contact, some pretending to type, others staring with uncomfortable sympathy. Daniel packed his belongings into a cardboard box. Family photos, a stress ball Liam had given him, a notebook filled with ideas no one would ever read now. As he exited the building, sunlight hit his face, cruelly bright. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, people rushing to jobs that still wanted them. Daniel sat on a bench outside the office, the box at his feet, his hands trembling. He checked his bank balance, then did the math in his head. Rent, school fees, food, 2 months, maybe less. His phone buzzed with a reminder to pick up Liam from school at 4. That simple notification broke something inside him. He pressed his lips together, forcing the tears back. Crying wouldn't fix anything. That evening, Daniel cooked pasta with almost no sauce, smiling and joking so Liam wouldn't notice. They did homework together, laughed at a cartoon, followed their usual routine. Only when Liam fell asleep did Daniel allow the truth to settle in. He sat alone at the kitchen table, bills spread out like accusations. The job he had depended on, trusted, was gone, taken without warning, without compassion. He stared at his son's bedroom door and made himself a promise, the same promise he made every night since his wife's funeral. No matter what, Liam would not feel this fear. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, and Daniel, a man who had given everything to be responsible, realized he was standing at the edge of a future he could no longer control. The days after the dismissal blurred together, each one carrying the same quiet panic wrapped in forced routine. Daniel woke early as always, making sure Liam never sensed how fragile everything had become. He still walked him to school, still smiled at the teachers, still nodded politely to other parents who talked about vacations and promotions. But the moment Liam disappeared through the school gates, Daniel's shoulders sagged, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He spent his mornings at the kitchen table, laptop open, firing out resumes to every company that even remotely matched his experience. He rewrote cover letters, adjusted job titles, softened his seniority to seem less expensive, swallowed his pride with every click of the send button. Rejections came quickly, sometimes within hours, other times as automated emails that began with "We regret to inform you." A few interviews followed, but when employers heard about his need for flexible hours or mentioned his gap in availability due to childcare, their interest cooled. Each polite smile felt like a door closing softly but firmly in his face. Money began to disappear faster than Daniel had calculated. Groceries were chosen with care, brand names replaced by whatever was cheapest. He canceled subscriptions, sold old electronics, and finally listed his car online, telling himself public transport would be fine. The night the car sold, he stood by the window and watched the buyer drive away, feeling as though another piece of his independence had been taken. Freelance work came sporadically, late-night system fixes, temporary contracts that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Daniel slept less, his eyes constantly burning, his patience thinning despite his best efforts. Liam noticed. Children always do. One evening, as Daniel counted coins to see if they could afford takeout, Liam asked if Daddy was in trouble. Daniel laughed it off, ruffled his hair, and said they were just having an adventure, but the word tasted bitter in his mouth. At Liam's school, the strain began to show. His teacher requested a meeting, gently explaining that Liam had been distracted, drawing pictures of their apartment instead of paying attention, asking questions about money no child his age should worry about. Walking home together, Liam's small hand in his, Daniel felt a sharp ache of guilt. That night, Liam asked if they would have to move or if he would have to leave his school. Daniel knelt down, looked into his son's anxious eyes, and promised that wouldn't happen. He didn't know how he would keep that promise, but he meant it with every part of himself. After Liam went to bed, Daniel sat in the dark, scrolling through job postings again, feeling invisible, discarded by a system that had once praised him. While Daniel's world narrowed to survival, chaos quietly grew inside the company that had fired him. Projects stalled, deadlines were missed, and small technical issues turned into costly failures. Systems Daniel had built and maintained with precision began to unravel without him there to quietly fix them before anyone noticed. Complaints rose, clients grew impatient, and profits dipped in ways the board couldn't easily explain. At the top of it all sat Eleanor Whitmore, the company's largest investor and public face, a woman known for her sharp instincts and intolerance for incompetence. She demanded answers, reviewing reports late into the night, her frustration growing with every failed explanation. When a massive security breach hit one of their flagship platforms, costing millions overnight, Eleanor personally ordered a deep audit of the company's internal history. That was when Daniel's name began to appear again and again, not in scandals or mistakes, but in records of past successes, emergency fixes, and projects that had once saved the company from disaster. Eleanor noticed a pattern. Before Daniel's termination, stability. After, chaos. Curious, she dug deeper, reading his performance reviews, commendations, and the cold termination summary that reduced him to a line item labeled redundant. Something about it felt wrong. She requested a private briefing and learned that Daniel had been let go during a cost-cutting initiative, despite being one of the most reliable employees in the department. There had been no warning, no performance issues, no attempt to retain him. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a flicker of doubt in the leadership she had trusted. Back in his apartment, Daniel received a call from an unknown number while cooking dinner. He nearly ignored it, assuming it was another recruiter offering false hope or a bill collector. When he answered, the voice on the other end was calm, confident, and unfamiliar. The woman introduced herself as Eleanor Whitmore and asked if he was Daniel Carter. He nearly dropped the phone. She explained that she was reviewing recent company decisions and wanted to speak with him about his experience. Daniel's first instinct was anger, followed closely by exhaustion. He almost said no. Instead, he listened as she asked, politely but firmly, if they could meet. After a long pause, he agreed, unsure whether this conversation would change anything or simply reopen wounds he was trying desperately to heal. When the call ended, Daniel stared at the wall, heart pounding, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Uncertain hope, fragile and dangerous, but impossible to ignore. Daniel spent the night before the meeting barely sleeping, his thoughts looping endlessly between anger and anticipation. He replayed the moment he'd been escorted out of the building, the sterile words that had erased years of loyalty, and the quiet humiliation of carrying a cardboard box past coworkers who suddenly couldn't look at him. At the same time, he wondered why someone as powerful as Eleanor Whitmore would want to see him now. By morning, he had decided one thing. He would not beg. He dressed carefully, choosing the only suit he still owned, freshly pressed despite its worn edges, and dropped Liam off at school with an extra long hug. On the train ride downtown, Daniel watched reflections of strangers in the window, each face carrying its own private struggle, and reminded himself that whatever happened next, his dignity mattered. The building Eleanor worked in was nothing like Daniel's old office. Glass walls stretched toward the sky, polished floors reflected the light, and everything smelled faintly of money and control. A receptionist greeted him by name, already expecting him, and escorted him to a private office overlooking the city. When Eleanor entered, Daniel recognized her instantly from news articles and conference videos. She was composed, impeccably dressed, her presence commanding without effort. Yet when she shook his hand, her grip was firm and respectful, and her eyes held a seriousness that surprised him. She invited him to sit and asked him to speak freely about his time at the company. At first, Daniel answered cautiously, sticking to facts, but as the minutes passed, something in her attentive silence encouraged honesty. He spoke about his role, the systems he had built, the pressure to hold everything together without recognition. Eventually, the words he'd buried for weeks spilled out, about being fired without warning, about being a single father, about the fear of failing his son. His voice faltered, but Eleanor didn't interrupt. When Daniel finished, the room was quiet except for the distant hum of the city below. Eleanor leaned back, her expression unreadable, then admitted that the company was struggling far more than anyone outside knew. She told him about the failed projects, the breach, the losses that no amount of public relations could hide. She said his absence had revealed how much of the company's stability had depended on him. Then she surprised him by apologizing, not with corporate language, but plainly, acknowledging that what had been done to him was wrong. She offered him his job back with a significantly higher salary, flexible hours, and expanded authority. The offer hung in the air, tempting and heavy. For a moment, Daniel imagined the relief. Paid bills, security for Liam, a return to normal. But another image followed quickly, walking back into the same building that had discarded him, pretending nothing had happened. Daniel took a deep breath and told her he needed time to think. He explained that money alone wouldn't erase what he'd felt or guarantee it wouldn't happen again. Eleanor studied him closely, as if weighing something beyond profit and loss. She nodded and said she understood. Before he left, she asked one more question. What would it take for him to come back? Daniel hesitated, then spoke carefully. He said the company needed to change how it treated people, especially those with families who had no safety net. He talked about fairness, transparency, and accountability, about creating a place where loyalty wasn't exploited but respected. Eleanor didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was softer. She said change was difficult, but not impossible. After the meeting, Daniel walked out into the open air, feeling both lighter and more unsettled than before. He picked Liam up from school and took him to the park, watching him run freely, his laughter rising above the noise of the city. Sitting on a bench, Daniel thought about the choice in front of him. He could return and secure their future, or he could walk away and protect his self-respect, even if it meant continuing to struggle. That night, as he tucked Liam into bed, his son asked if things were getting better. Daniel smiled and said they were moving in the right direction. Later, alone in the kitchen, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor asking to meet again the next day. He stared at the screen for a long time, sensing that this time the balance of power had shifted. Meanwhile, Eleanor returned to the company floor unannounced, observing the disarray firsthand. She watched teams argue over unresolved issues, managers scramble for solutions Daniel once provided effortlessly. In a closed-door meeting with the board, she challenged their decisions, pointing directly to Daniel's termination as a turning point. The board pushed back, citing precedent and policy, unwilling to admit fault. For the first time in her career, Eleanor felt genuine frustration not at numbers, but at people. That night, she reviewed Daniel's file again, then closed her laptop and made a decision driven not by strategy, but by conscience. If the company would not take responsibility, she would, and she would do it in a way none of them could ignore. The knock on Daniel's door came just after sunrise, soft but deliberate, the kind that carried intention rather than urgency. Daniel opened it expecting a neighbor or perhaps a delivery mistake, and instead found Eleanor Whitmore standing in the narrow hallway, the early light catching the edges of her tailored coat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The contrast between her world and his was impossible to ignore. The billionaire investor framed by peeling paint, children's drawings taped unevenly to the wall, and the faint smell of coffee brewed too thin. Daniel stepped aside instinctively, and she entered, taking in the space with quiet attention rather than judgment. Liam peeked from his bedroom doorway, curiosity written across his face. Eleanor crouched to his level, introduced herself with a gentle smile, and asked about the dinosaur drawing taped beside the door. Liam's guarded expression softened as he explained it proudly. Watching the exchange, Daniel felt something in his chest loosen. Eleanor stood and faced Daniel, her composure shifting into something more human. She apologized again, this time without the distance of an office or a negotiation table. She told him she had confronted the board and demanded they reverse the decision, but they had refused, more afraid of admitting fault than of losing what truly mattered. Her voice lowered as she admitted that the company was unraveling and that she had underestimated the cost of treating people as expendable. Then, in a moment that stunned Daniel, Eleanor said she was there not as a millionaire or an executive, but as someone asking for help. She said plainly that the company needed him, and she was willing to do whatever it took to earn his trust back. The word beg was never spoken, but it hung heavy in the air, unmistakable. Daniel listened in silence, the echoes of sleepless nights and swallowed pride rushing back. He looked around his small apartment, at the life he had protected with sheer will, and felt the weight of the choice one last time. He told Eleanor he would return, but only if things changed, not later, not quietly, but now. He laid out his conditions with calm clarity: formal protections for single parents and caregivers, transparent review processes before any termination, and a seat at the table where decisions affecting people's lives were made. Eleanor nodded without hesitation. She agreed to every term and promised to put her own influence and reputation behind them. Before leaving, she knelt once more to Liam's level and told him his father was a very important man. Liam beamed, squeezing Daniel's hand. The changes happened faster than anyone expected. Eleanor announced new policies publicly, acknowledging past mistakes and committing to a more humane corporate culture. The board resisted, but her authority and conviction left them little room to maneuver. Daniel returned to the company not as a quiet employee, but as a respected leader, his presence immediately stabilizing the teams that had floundered without him. Colleagues who had once looked away now sought his guidance, and Daniel offered it without bitterness, determined to be the example he wished he had once seen. Work became demanding again, but it was different. His hours flexible, his voice heard, his worth recognized. A tea home. Life slowly regained its warmth. Bills were paid on time, meals were no longer measured, and laughter returned to the apartment without effort. One evening, Daniel and Liam sat in the park watching the sky fade into evening, the city humming softly around them. Liam asked if Daddy was happy now. Daniel thought about the journey, the fear, the loss, the unexpected humility of a powerful woman standing in his hallway, and answered honestly that he was. Not because he had won, but because he had been seen. As the lights came on across the city, Daniel understood that the moment he had been fired was not the end of his story, but the beginning of one that proved dignity, when defended, could change more than a single life.